I was instructed to inform you your invitation has been canceled.
And the 65,000?
They will be retaining the deposit. Tell them they just started a war.
And for 65,000, I expected more than cheap fabric.
Imported silk isn't cheap. What's cheap is your respect.
Some people simply don't meet the right social standard.
Yes, her little hotel is quaint, but hardly elegant.
Ava, please, compromise for family. Clause 11B, your sister is to be excluded after marriage.
Fraud!
That's what this is. Fraud, and I'll bury it in court.
This isn't love. It's a cage.
James, control her!
I'm sorry, Ava. Truly.
Sorry doesn't erase betrayal, but it's a
To
start.
family, the kind you choose.
True power is saying no.
My name is Ava. I'm 34 years old, and I'm the founder of the Sapphire Grand Hotel Empire. When my golden boy brother James finally got engaged, this was supposed to be the moment our family truly celebrated together. I wanted to give him the perfect day, so I offered him my flagship hotel as the venue, and I wrote a personal check for $65,000 to cover the deposit. A gift. But just 10 days before the wedding, his planner called with a message. A message from my family. She said, "Your invitation has been canceled, but they will be keeping the $65,000 deposit." That one sentence, it didn't just break my heart. It felt like my entire life of being the responsible one, the one who always fixed things, was nothing more than a transaction. They thought I would just accept it. They had no idea they had just declared war on a CEO. If you know what it feels like to be the one who gives everything, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, because you will want to see how this wedding disaster ended up costing them everything. While my family was busy celebrating James's latest minor achievement, I was quietly building an empire. It didn't happen overnight. It was forged in the fire of 18-hour workdays, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the relentless desire to prove them wrong, to prove everyone wrong. After college, I didn't take the easy route. I started at the bottom, a front desk agent at a boutique hotel, smiling through rude guests and memorizing the names of everyone who mattered. I watched. I learned. I absorbed everything like a sponge. My manager, a tough-as-nails woman named Carol, saw something in me. She saw the hunger. Within a year, she promoted me to supervisor. By 27, I was the director of operations for one of the most prestigious hotel groups in the city. I was good at my job. I was damn good. But working for someone else? It was never going to be enough. I wasn't just building a career. I was building an escape hatch. The opportunity came in the form of a rundown historic hotel on the verge of foreclosure. The place was called the Embers. It had gorgeous bones, incredible architecture, and a reputation for terrible management. The banks thought it was a lost cause. My father told me it was a fool's errand. He said, "Ava, stick to what you know. Don't overreach." James just laughed and asked if he could borrow $500. That was the moment I knew I had to do it. I drained my entire life savings, every penny I had scraped together. I took out a small business loan that felt like an anchor tied around my neck, and I bought it. For 2 straight years, I lived and breathed the Embers. I wasn't just the owner. I was the project manager, the interior designer, and the janitor when the pipes burst at 3 in the morning. I was there on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors and hanging drywall beside the contractors. I poured my soul into that building, and slowly, agonizingly, it started to work. I renamed it the Sapphire Grand, a fresh start, a new identity. I focused on a level of service that was almost obsessive. My staff were trained to anticipate a guest's needs before the guest even knew they had them. Word started to spread, first among business travelers, then luxury bloggers, and finally, the magazines. The city's best-kept secret, one headline read. 5-star luxury with a soul, said another. The bookings flooded in. In its 3rd year, the Sapphire Grand became profitable, wildly profitable. But I didn't stop. I didn't buy a fancy car. I didn't go on a vacation. I reinvested. Every single dollar. I used that success as leverage to secure funding for a second location, then a third. My family, they barely noticed. To them, I was still just Ava, the one with the little hotel. My mother would introduce me at parties by saying, "This is my daughter, Ava. She manages a quaint little place downtown." A quaint little place. I remember smiling politely while on the inside, I was calculating the quarterly revenue growth of a multi-million-dollar property. My father, the numbers man, never once asked to see my books. He never asked about my profit margins, my expansion strategy, or my 5-year plan. Why would he? In his mind, I was the daughter who was good at her little hobby. James was the son who was destined for greatness, even if he was currently unemployed and living in a condo paid for by our parents. And this was my secret weapon. Their ignorance was my armor. They had no idea about the scale of my operation. They didn't know that the Sapphire Grand wasn't just one hotel anymore. It was a holding company, a corporation with 5 flagship properties across the country, a high-end catering business called Elite, and real estate assets that would make my father's head spin. They saw me living in a modest apartment, driving a reliable but unremarkable car, and assumed I was just getting by. Just getting by. I owned the building my apartment was in. They had no idea that I wasn't just a hotel manager. I was the house. I was at the bank. Every time they looked at me with that dismissive pity, every time they brushed off my success, they were unknowingly handing me more power. They were building the pedestal from which I would eventually watch their world crumble. And I let them. I let them believe I was just the reliable, strong daughter who could take care of herself, because one day, I knew I would have to. The beginning of the end started at a charity golf tournament. It sounds cliché, I know. My catering company, Elite, was handling the event. James, my brother, came along mostly for the free food and the open bar. And that's where he met Melissa Blake. From a distance, she was everything my mother ever wanted for him. She had old money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Her family's name was plastered on hospital wings and museum galleries. She was polished, poised, and had a smile that could cut glass. When James introduced us, that smile never quite reached her eyes. She shook my hand, her grip limp and brief. "Oh," she said, looking me up and down. "You're the sister who runs hotels. How quaint." Quaint. The word just hung in the air between us, as if I ran a little bed and breakfast with floral wallpaper, not a multi-million-dollar corporation. James, of course, was completely oblivious. He was hooked. And just like that, the brother I knew started to disappear. The warning signs were subtle at first, little tremors before the earthquake. James, who used to call me every other day, suddenly became hard to reach. Our weekly brunches became monthly. Then, they just stopped. When he did answer his phone, his voice was different, distant. Then came the strange questions from my parents. My mother called me one Tuesday afternoon, her voice unnaturally sweet. "Ava, darling," she began. "Your father and I were just wondering, that little hotel of yours must be doing quite well, right? Are you thinking about expanding?" A week later, my father called. It was even weirder coming from him. "Ava, I need a ballpark figure. What's your annual revenue? And are you the sole proprietor or do you have investors?" I was confused. My father, who had never shown an ounce of interest in my business, was suddenly asking about my corporate structure. I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Something was happening. A conversation was taking place that I wasn't a part of. Then James called. He was engaged. My first reaction was genuine happiness for him, despite my reservations about Melissa. But then came the problem. The Blakes wanted a wedding fit for royalty, but the venues they wanted were either booked or astronomically expensive. James sounded stressed, defeated. So I did what I always did. I stepped in to fix it. I offered him the grand ballroom at my flagship Sapphire Grand. As the owner's brother, he'd get the royal treatment. And to seal the deal, to show my support, and maybe, just maybe, build a bridge with my new extended family, I made an offer. I told him I would cover the venue and catering deposit as my wedding gift. $65,000. James was floored. He said, "Ava, that's too much. We can't accept that." But behind him, I could hear Melissa's sharp voice. "Don't be silly, darling. Of course we accept." And that was it. The check was signed, the contract was executed, and the floodgates of hell opened. The moment they had my money, I ceased to exist as a family member. I became a vendor, an obstacle. Melissa and her mother, Eleanor, treated my hotel like their personal playground. They demanded changes that were not only unreasonable, but insulting. They wanted to remove a historic chandelier from the ballroom because it clashed with their color palette. They insisted that my Michelin-trained chefs create 15 different sample menus. 15. The sense of entitlement was suffocating. But I swallowed my pride. I smiled. I accommodated. I told myself this was for James. This was to make him happy. The breaking point, the first real crack in my resolve, happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking through the main lobby of the Sapphire Grand, and I saw them. Melissa and Eleanor cornered my hotel manager, Anthony. Anthony is a consummate professional, a man who has handled royalty and rock stars without breaking a sweat. But at that moment, he looked trapped. Melissa was holding up a fabric swatch, her voice dripping with condescension. "No, Anthony," she said loudly for everyone in the lobby to hear. "I don't want them covered. I want them reupholstered. This cheap fabric you have is simply unacceptable." I could feel the blood rush to my face. That cheap fabric was imported Italian silk that cost $400 a yard. Anthony tried to explain the logistical nightmare of reupholstering 300 chairs in under 2 months, but Eleanor cut him off. "Don't bring us problems, bring us solutions," she snapped. I couldn't stay silent. I walked over. "Is there an issue here?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Melissa turned, a flash of annoyance in her eyes. "Natalie," she said, emphasizing my name as if I were a naughty child. "I was just explaining my vision to your employee." "My employee." The words were a deliberate jab. "Anthony is my hotel manager," I corrected her. "And his professional opinion is that your request is unfeasible." She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure disdain. "Frankly," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "for the $65,000 you contributed, I was expecting a little more of a can-do attitude. Perhaps your definition of 5-star isn't the same as ours." It felt like a physical blow. She was using my gift, my gesture of love for my brother, as a weapon to humiliate me in my own hotel. I looked for James, and there he was. He had just walked into the lobby. He saw the whole thing. He saw the look on my face. He saw the way his fiancée was treating me. And he did nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend my staff. He walked right past me, put his arm around Melissa, and said, "Honey, don't get stressed. Let me talk to Ava. She'll sort it out." She'll sort it out, not. That's my sister you're talking to. Not. You're being unreasonable. Just. She'll sort it out. As if I were the problem to be managed. As if my feelings, my professional integrity, were completely irrelevant. In that moment, watching him choose her so completely, so effortlessly, I felt a profound sense of foreboding. This wasn't just about chair fabric. This wasn't just a bridezilla moment. This was a realignment of power. It was a declaration. And I was on the losing side. The ground beneath my feet was cracking, and I had a terrifying feeling that the worst was yet to come. I couldn't have possibly imagined how right I was. At this point in the story, I don't even know what word to use for how this feels. If you're feeling as outraged as I am right now, help me out and comment one word to describe what this family did. After the incident in the lobby, a chilling silence fell between me and my family. The casual phone calls stopped. The texts became non-existent. It was as if a curtain had been drawn, and I was on the outside, looking in. But the preparations for the wedding continued, a well-oiled machine churning forward without me. The first real alarm bell rang when the 3-month mark passed. No invitation arrived in my mailbox. I casually mentioned it to James during a brief, stilted phone call. "Oh, they went out last week," he said vaguely. "Melissa handled the guest list. I'm sure yours is on the way." It never came. Another month went by. Nothing. I told myself it was a mistake, a mail mix-up. Surely they wouldn't just forget. Then my cousin Dana called, gushing about the invitation. "Ava, it's gorgeous," she said. "That gold foil embossing must have cost a fortune, and the handwritten note from Melissa was such a lovely touch." A handwritten note. My heart sank into my shoes. I had received neither. When I checked with other family members, it was the same story. Everyone had their invitation. Everyone but me. The unease in my stomach began to churn into a sickening dread. Around the same time, photos from Melissa's bridal shower appeared on social media. I hadn't been invited. I saw pictures of my mother, laughing and posing with Eleanor Blake, a champagne flute in her hand. My own mother. At a party celebrating my brother's wedding, a party I wasn't even told about. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place during a routine check-in with my events team. My coordinator, a wonderfully efficient woman named Chloe, looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Warren," she said, hesitating. Miss Blake requested a final copy of the reception seating chart. My blood ran cold. "Show me," I said. She pulled it up on her screen. I scanned the names at the head table. Robert Warren, Linda Warren, Howard Blake, Eleanor Blake, James Warren, Melissa Blake. The seat next to my brother was empty. My name was nowhere to be found. Not at the family table, not at any table. I wasn't on the list. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe shook her head gently. Miss Blake was very specific. She reviewed the list herself. Multiple times. It all culminated in a family dinner a month before the wedding. My parents had somehow managed to get into the same room for the first time in years, a testament to the magnitude of this union. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Melissa and Eleanor kept whispering to each other, shooting glances in my direction. Then, during the main course, Eleanor made a comment that sent a chill down my spine. "A wedding is not just a celebration," she said, swirling her wine. "It's a statement about your place in society, the proper guests, the right connections." Melissa nodded in agreement, looking directly at me. "Some people simply don't understand the social implications," she added. "Running hotels is one thing, but appreciating true elegance is quite another." The implication was clear. In their eyes, I was the help. I looked at James, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me. He just stared intently at his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. My mother tried to change the subject, mentioning my generous contribution. Melissa's response was swift and cutting. "Yes, the financial arrangement has been helpful," she said, "though we have had to make substantial upgrades to bring the space up to standard. To bring my 5-star flagship hotel up to standard." The disrespect was so profound, so blatant, it left me speechless. I tried to cling to a sliver of hope. Maybe this was all Melissa and her mother. Maybe James was just trapped, going along to keep the peace. I sent him one last heartfelt email, reminding him of everything we had been through, of his promise to always have my back. His reply was brief, formal. It felt like it was written by a stranger. "Thank you for your understanding," it read. "I will speak with Melissa about the guest list situation." I never heard another word. The wedding was now just 10 days away. And then, the phone call. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a budget meeting with my executive team, my phone set to silent. But it buzzed. An unfamiliar number. Something made me answer. "Hello, is this Ava Warren?" a professional female voice asked. It was Victoria Hayes, the wedding planner. "I'm calling regarding your deposit payment of $65,000, she began. My heart skipped a beat. "Yes? Is there an issue?" There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. "Not exactly," she said. "I have been instructed by the family to inform you that your invitation to the wedding has been canceled." The world stopped. The voices in the conference room faded into a dull roar. Canceled. My own brother's wedding. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, my voice tight. Victoria cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "The family has decided to revise the guest list. However, they would like to retain the deposit you provided." Retain the deposit. Keep the money. My $65,000. The words echoed in my head, nonsensical and monstrous. "Which family?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Who exactly made this decision?" "Miss Blake and her mother provided the instruction," Victoria replied. "I was told that Mr. Warren is aware and has agreed to the arrangement." James, my brother. He had agreed to this. He had agreed to uninvite me, his only sister, from his wedding, and keep my money. The brother who used to give me half his sandwich at school. The brother who held my hand at our grandmother's funeral and promised we would always have each other. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. I felt something inside me snap. The years of hurt, the decades of being taken for granted, the constant, draining effort of being the strong one. It all coalesced into a single, blinding moment of clarity. There were no more tears to cry. There was no more pain to feel. There was only a cold, hard certainty. Enough was enough. The game was over. And it was my turn to make a move. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call James and demand an explanation. I hung up the phone, walked back into my budget meeting, and sat down. My COO, Anthony, looked at me, concerned. "Is everything all right, Ava?" I looked at the spreadsheets on the screen, the numbers clear and sharp. For the first time in months, everything was crystal clear. "Actually, yes," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "I think everything is finally becoming very clear." After the meeting, I didn't go home. I went to my office, the one on the top floor of the Sapphire Grand, with a panoramic view of the city I had conquered. I sat in my leather chair, the silence of the room a comforting blanket. The part of me that had always craved their approval. The little sister who just wanted her big brother to be proud of her. That part of me died on the phone with Victoria Hayes. And in her place, a CEO was born. A CEO who had just been presented with a clear case of breach of contract and potential fraud. My actions were methodical, precise. There was no emotion, only strategy. First, I opened my laptop and pulled up the event contract Melissa Blake had signed. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the fine print I had written myself years ago, and there it was. Section 12. The Sapphire Grand reserves the right to cancel any event that violates our company's core values, which include respect and integrity, or poses a reputational risk to the establishment. Their actions weren't just disrespectful, they were a direct violation of a legally binding agreement. Next, I picked up my phone. Not to call my mother, not to call my father. I called my corporate lawyer, David Chen. David, I said, my voice steady. It's Ava Warren. I need you to look at a contract for me. I believe we have a significant issue with the Warren-Blake wedding. I explained the situation in cold, hard facts. The deposit, the uninvitation, the attempt to keep the funds. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then David said, his voice laced with disbelief and professional fury, Ava, this isn't just unethical. This is textbook fraudulent inducement. They don't have a leg to stand on. Finally, I opened my email. I composed a message, not to my brother, not to Melissa, but to Victoria Hayes, the wedding planner. The subject line was simple. Urgent, regarding event contract, BER 743B. The body of the email was short, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It read, Victoria, following our conversation, please inform the Blake and Warren families that they are in material breach of Section 12 of their event contract. Unless I receive a formal, written apology and a personal confirmation of my invitation from both the bride and groom by 5 p.m. today, the Sapphire Grand will be exercising its right to cancel the event in its entirety. As per the cancellation policy they agreed to, all deposits will be forfeited. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Ava Warren, CEO, Sapphire Grand Hospitality Group. I typed my full title deliberately. It was time they remembered who they were dealing with. I hit send. The clock on my computer screen read 4:15 p.m. They had 45 minutes. The bomb had been planted. The timer was ticking. And I leaned back in my chair, perfectly calm, waiting for the explosion. The explosion happened faster than I expected. My phone started vibrating at 4:32 p.m. It was James. I let it go to voicemail. Then Melissa called. Ignored. Then an unknown number, which I assumed was Eleanor Blake. Ignored. The chaos was brewing, a storm gathering just outside my door. At precisely 4:55 p.m., my assistant's voice came through the intercom, calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. Ms. Warren, she said, your brother, the Blakes, and your parents are in the lobby. They're insistent. I smiled. Of course they are, I said. Please escort them to the main conference room, Sarah. Not my office. The conference room. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a corporate negotiation, and I was on home turf. I let them wait for 5 minutes. It was a deliberate power move. Let them stew in the tension. Let them feel the weight of the room. The conference room at the Sapphire Grand is designed to intimidate. It's a cavern of dark mahogany, smoked glass, and a single massive marble table that feels as cold and unyielding as a tombstone. When I finally walked in, the scene was exactly as I had pictured. Melissa was red-faced and teary, clutching her mother's arm. Eleanor looked like she could breathe fire, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. My parents looked bewildered, caught in a crossfire they didn't understand. And James? My brother looked like a cornered animal. His face was a mask of anger and raw embarrassment. He was the first to speak, his voice cracking with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded as soon as the heavy door clicked shut behind me. I didn't sit down. I remained standing at the head of the table, hands clasped calmly in front of me. I let the silence hang for a beat, meeting each of their gazes one by one. I'm enforcing the terms of our contract, I replied, my voice even and devoid of emotion. And for the first time in my life, I am standing up for myself. Howard Blake, Melissa's father, a big man used to throwing his weight around, stepped forward. He had the blustering confidence of a man who thought money could solve any problem. This is outrageous, he boomed. We have a binding agreement. You can't just cancel a wedding with 10 days' notice. I'll have my lawyers all over you for breach of contract. I almost smiled. This was a language I understood. Please, feel free, I said, gesturing to an empty chair. But before you make that call, you might want to have your lawyer read Section 12 of the venue contract your daughter signed. It's quite clear. The Sapphire Grand reserves the right to cancel any event that violates our ethical standards or poses a reputational risk. Eleanor scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. Ethical standards? What nonsense is this? This was my moment. The first boom. I looked directly at Howard Blake, the businessman. Attempting to exclude the venue owner from her own brother's wedding while retaining her $65,000 financial contribution, I stated, each word precise and deliberate, constitutes fraud. That, Mr. Blake, violates both ethical standards and, as my lawyer David Chen would be happy to explain to your lawyer, potentially, the law. The word fraud hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Howard Blake's blustering demeanor faltered. He was a businessman. He understood the gravity of that accusation. Melissa burst into a fresh wave of tears. "We didn't exclude you," she wailed. "We just revised the guest list." "By removing only me," I countered, my voice like ice. "After accepting my contribution." My mother, finally finding her voice, stepped forward, looking utterly lost. "Ava, what is going on? Why wouldn't you be invited to your own brother's wedding?" I turned my gaze to James, giving him one last chance to explain himself, to say something. Anything. He just stared at the plush carpet, unable to meet my eyes. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "This is a misunderstanding," James finally muttered, his voice lacking any conviction. "Victoria must have confused the instructions. That was a mistake." Victoria Hayes, the planner, had been quietly observing from a corner of the room. She was a professional caught in a family war, and she chose her side. She straightened her spine. "I followed Miss Blake's instructions exactly as they were given to me," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I was told to inform Ms. Warren that her invitation had been rescinded, but that the deposit would be retained." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous." "So there was a miscommunication. It happens. That's no reason to threaten the entire wedding." "This was not a miscommunication," I said, my voice hardening. "This was a deliberate decision to use me, to take my money, and then to discard me when I was no longer useful." "You offered that money as a gift," Melissa snapped, her grief momentarily replaced by venom. "Gifts don't come with conditions." "They do when the gift is part of a business transaction with a signed contract," I retorted. "And they certainly do when the condition is basic human decency." That was when Eleanor Blake played her final desperate card. She saw she was losing the battle of logic and contracts, so she decided to change the game entirely. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a thick, leather-bound document, and slammed it down on the marble table. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. "This is absurd," she announced, her voice dripping with contempt. "James, perhaps this is a good time to finalize this. This is the final version of the prenuptial agreement. Our lawyers added the clause we discussed." The room went still. A prenup. Of course. But it was the way she said it, the triumphant look in her eye, that made my blood run cold. James stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "James," he said, his voice strained. "Is this true? Did you agree to exclude your sister from your wedding?" James looked trapped, his eyes darting between Melissa, his mother, and me. "It's complicated," he mumbled. It wasn't complicated at all. And Eleanor was about to make it brutally simple. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the document. "Clause 11B, for your clarification," she said, her cold eyes locking onto mine. "It stipulates that upon marriage, James will be required to limit unnecessary social and business contact with family members who do not meet a certain social standard, unless agreed upon in writing by both parties. The second boom. It was louder, more devastating than the first. This wasn't just about a wedding invitation anymore. This wasn't just about $65,000. This was a hostile takeover of my brother's life. A legally binding document designed to systematically erase me from his future, to codify my status as unacceptable. I looked at James. The color had drained from his face. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. All the fight, all the blustering anger was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. He was seeing his future laid out before him on that cold marble table. A future where he would have to ask his wife's permission to have dinner with his own sister. A future where our bond, forged through years of hardship and mutual support, could be severed with the stroke of a pen. Eleanor had intended to put me in my place, to show me who held the real power. But in her arrogance, she had overplayed her hand. She hadn't just shown me what my future with this family would look like. She had shown James what his future would look like. A gilded cage. And I stood there silent, watching the foundations of their perfect, curated world crack and crumble before my very eyes. The silence that followed Eleanor's revelation about the prenup was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by Melissa's sharp intake of breath. The mask of the grieving bride had vanished, replaced by the cold, hard face of a strategist whose gambit had just spectacularly failed. But it was James I was watching. He stared at the leather-bound document on the table as if it were a bomb he had just realized was live. His face, which had been flushed with anger just moments before, was now a ghostly white. He looked from the contract to Eleanor, then to Melissa, and finally, his eyes landed on me. For the first time in months, he truly saw me, and in his eyes I saw the full, devastating weight of his betrayal settle upon him. Howard Blake was the first to break. He looked at his wife not with anger, but with a kind of weary disappointment. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "What have you done?" But Eleanor was not one to admit defeat. She doubled down. "I've done what was necessary to protect our family's interests," she snapped, her gaze flicking between me and James. "Something your daughter Robert clearly doesn't understand." That's when the chaos erupted. It wasn't a single explosion, but a chain reaction of panic and blame. Melissa, realizing the very real possibility that her $500,000 society wedding was about to evaporate, turned on James. "Do something!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "This is your sister! Control her!" James flinched as if she had slapped him. "Control her?" he repeated, his voice hollow. "Melissa, did you read this? Did you know about this clause?" His question was met with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's just legal stuff, James. It doesn't mean anything." "It doesn't mean anything?" he echoed, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. "It means everything. It means you were planning to legally cut me off from my own sister." The blame game began in earnest, a vicious circular firing squad of accusations. Eleanor blamed me for being difficult and creating a scene. "If you had just accepted your place, none of this would be happening," she hissed. Melissa blamed James for not having me under control. James, finally finding a spark of his old self, turned on Melissa. "My place? My sister built this entire place. Maybe the problem isn't her place, but yours." My own parents, who had been silent spectators, were pulled into the fray. My mother, seeing her dreams of a socially advantageous union crumbling, started to cry. "Ava, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Think of your brother. Think of the family. Can't you just compromise?" Compromise. For my entire life, that word had been a one-way street. It meant Ava gives and everyone else takes. It meant Ava works 3 jobs so James can have an allowance. It meant Ava missed her own birthday so James could go to his football game. It meant Ava swallowed her pride, her hurt, her anger, to keep a fragile peace that was never really peaceful at all. It was just quiet. I looked at my mother, at her tear-streaked face and her desperate eyes, and I felt nothing. The well of compromise had run dry. The bank of my goodwill was officially closed. I remained silent, letting the storm rage around me. Their panic was a fascinating thing to observe. It was the raw, primal fear of people who have lost control. For their entire lives, they had operated in a world where their money, their status, and their name could bend reality to their will. But in this room, on my turf, none of that mattered. I had the contract. I had the leverage. I had the truth. And they were utterly powerless. Their carefully constructed reality was shattering against the cold, hard fact that they had messed with the wrong person. When their shouting finally subsided into exhausted, ragged breaths, Eleanor turned her venom on me one last time. This was the final stage, the attempt to rewrite the narrative, to cast me as the villain of the story. "Look what you've done," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "You've ruined everything. All because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention for one day. You've destroyed your brother's happiness. I hope you're proud of yourself." The accusation was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. But I held my ground, my expression unreadable. I didn't need to defend myself. The prenup, still sitting in the middle of the table, was my defense. It was my closing argument. Then came my mother's final desperate plea. The one she had used on me 1,000 times before. The one that had always worked. She walked over to me, her face a mask of maternal anguish. "Ava, honey," she whispered, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. "How could you do this to us? To your family? After everything we've done for you?" "Everything you've done for me." The words hung in the air, a monument to their delusion. I thought of the missed birthdays, the condescending remarks, the constant draining expectation that I would be the adult in the room, even when I was just a child. I thought of the $65,000 I had given them, a gift they had tried to steal. I thought of Clause 11B. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I didn't list my grievances. I simply looked past her, past all of them, and fixed my gaze on James. He was the only one who mattered now. He was the one standing at the crossroads. He had seen the truth. He had seen the future they had planned for him. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Was he going to sign his life away and marry into this family of vipers? Or was he going to remember who he was? How were we? The room fell silent again, everyone's eyes turning to my brother. The beautiful, charming, golden boy who had never had to make a truly difficult decision in his entire life. Well, that was about to change. His entire future and what was left of our relationship hinged on what he said next. And I stood there, a silent executioner, waiting for the verdict. All eyes were on James. The weight of every past injustice, every broken promise seemed to press down on him in that suffocating conference room. He looked at the prenup, then at Melissa's impatient, expectant face. He looked at my mother's pleading expression and my father's stony disapproval. And then he looked at me. He didn't say anything. He just walked over to the table, picked up the expensive leather-bound document, and slowly, deliberately, ripped it in half. The sound of tearing paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a choice being made. It was the sound of freedom. "It's over," he said, his voice quiet but firm, dropping the two halves of the document onto the table. "The wedding is off." Eleanor Blake let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a scream. But James wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said. "I am so sorry." That was my cue. The negotiation was over. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation, a painful but necessary severing. I took a deep breath and addressed the stunned room. "It appears you all have some things to discuss," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound authority. "You have 24 hours to remove all personal items and vendor arrangements from my hotel. My legal team will be in contact with yours regarding the forfeiture of the deposit and any damages incurred. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run." I turned and walked towards the door, not looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel their shock and fury burning into my back. The moment the heavy conference room door clicked shut behind me, it was like coming up for air after being held underwater for a lifetime. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, my legs suddenly feeling weak. The silence was a blessing. That's when the door to my office, which was just down the hall, opened. My best friend Maya stood there. She must have broken every traffic law in the city to get here so fast. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and I walked into them, finally letting out the breath I felt like I had been holding for 34 years. That night, my phone was a relentless torrent of digital anguish, a barrage of texts and missed calls. There were a dozen from my mother, each one more frantic than the last. They started with pleading. "Ava, call me right now. We can fix this." Then they moved to guilt. "Your brother is devastated. How could you be so selfish?" And finally, they landed on blame. "You have torn this family apart. This is all your fault." My father sent one single terse text. It read, "You have made a grave miscalculation." A miscalculation. Even now, he saw this as a business deal gone wrong, not a heart being broken. I read each message, not with pain, but with a strange sense of detachment. It was like reading a case study about a dysfunctional family I didn't know. The words no longer had the power to hurt me. Then came the calls from James. Voicemail after voicemail of him just saying my name, his voice thick with unshed tears. I didn't answer. Not yet. It was too raw, too soon. I needed to build my walls back up, stronger this time. The Blakes, of course, were silent. Their communication would come through their lawyers. I was sure of it. Around midnight, sitting on my couch with Maya, a pizza box between us, I did something I had never done before. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled to Mom. I pressed and held. A menu popped up. Block number. I did the same for Dad. The sense of relief was immediate and overwhelming. It was a small act of digital defiance, but it felt monumental. It was the first lock I had ever put on a door. They thought they had the right to walk through at any time. This was the moment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I was choosing myself over their comfort, my peace, over their drama. This was a turning point. If you support this powerful decision, this act of self-preservation, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments right now to send some strength her way on this journey. The next morning, the silence was beautiful. My phone wasn't buzzing with demands or guilt trips. It was just quiet. My first call wasn't to a family member. It was for my team. I walked into the Sapphire Grand not as a wounded daughter, but as a CEO. I gathered my key staff, Anthony, my hotel manager, Chloe, my events coordinator, and my head of security. I laid out the situation clearly and professionally. "The Warren Blake wedding has been canceled," I announced, effective immediately. There was a collective, stunned silence, followed by a quiet ripple of what looked like relief. Anthony was the first to speak. "Good," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Ms. Warren, on behalf of the entire staff, thank you." It was then that I realized the full extent of the toxicity, their demands, their condescension, Their cruelty, it hadn't just affected me, it had poisoned my entire workplace, stressing my employees and creating a hostile environment. By standing up for myself, I had unknowingly stood up for them too. That day, my chosen family rallied around me in ways my blood relatives never had. My lawyer, David, called not just to talk strategy, but to ask, "Ava, are you okay? That was a brutal situation." My mentor, Carol, the woman who first promoted me, sent a simple text. "Heard what happened. Proud of you. Never let anyone devalue your worth." Messages of support came in from colleagues, from vendors, from people who understood the language of business and integrity. They saw what happened not as a family drama, but as a righteous defense against a hostile takeover. These people, my team, my friends, my mentors, they were my real foundation. They were the ones who saw my value not as a function of what I could do for them, but for who I was. The lines were drawn, the boundaries were set. I was no longer responsible for their happiness, their problems, or their feelings. My only responsibility now was to heal, and to build a new life on my own terms, a life where my worth wasn't up for debate. It's been a year since the wedding that never was. Life is different now, quieter. I'm standing on the balcony of my penthouse, a place my family has never seen. I sold my old apartment and bought this place a few months ago. It's my sanctuary. Below me, the city lights twinkle like a sea of scattered diamonds. It's peaceful. For the first time in my life, there is genuine peace. The chaos of that day in the conference room feels like a lifetime ago, a scene from someone else's movie. But the fallout was very real. The Blakes, as expected, tried to sue. My lawyer, David, shut them down so fast and so completely that they withdrew their claim within 48 hours. He presented them with a counterclaim for fraudulent inducement and reputational damages that would have kept them tied up in court for years. They paid for the non-refundable vendors and disappeared back into their world of silent, wealthy misery. I heard through the grapevine that Howard and Eleanor are separated. Apparently, the spectacular failure of their daughter's society wedding was a humiliation that even their marriage couldn't withstand. Melissa, true to form, was engaged to a hedge fund manager within 6 months. Some people never learn. My parents, well, they're still my parents. After a month of silence, the calls started again. First, my mother, crying, told me I had broken her heart. Then my father, with his cold, logical arguments about how I had damaged the family's standing. I listened. I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and ended the call. I didn't block them again, but I established a new boundary, a wall of polite, professional distance. Our conversations are now brief, superficial, and always on my terms. They haven't asked me for a single dollar since that day. It seems, finally, they've realized that the family ATM is permanently closed. And James? My brother had to face the consequences. He had to liquidate some of his assets, the ones my parents had gifted him, to pay back the Blakes for their share of the wedding costs. It was a humbling, brutal process. He sold the big truck. He moved out of the fancy condo and into a small apartment he could actually afford. He got a real job, working his way up from the bottom at a new construction firm without any help from our father. He was forced, for the first time in his 36 years, to stand on his own 2 feet. And it was the best thing that ever happened to him. About 2 months after the non-wedding, he called me. He didn't ask for anything. He just said, "Ava, can we have brunch? My treat." We met at our old spot, a little diner we used to go to as kids. He looked different, lighter. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He looked me in the eye and gave me the apology I had been waiting my whole life to hear. A real one. No excuses, no justifications. Just a raw, honest admission of how he had failed me and how sorry he was. It was the beginning. We started having brunch every Sunday again, just like old times. A few weeks ago, he brought someone with him. Her name is Sarah. She's an architect. She's smart, funny, kind, and when she shook my hand, she looked me right in the eye. She treated the waitress with the same respect she treated me. And when James introduced me as my amazing sister, the CEO who saved me from myself, Sarah just smiled and said, "I've heard so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet the legend." Looking out at the city from my balcony, I finally understand. For years, I defined my success by my balance sheets and my portfolio. I thought that building an empire would somehow earn me the love and respect I craved from my family. But I was wrong. That confrontation, that terrible, beautiful day, taught me the most important lesson of my life. True self-worth doesn't come from their approval. It comes from honoring your own values. Real strength isn't about endlessly giving. It's about knowing when to say no. And I learned that the family you build, the one based on mutual respect and unconditional support, is often stronger than the one you're born into. I didn't lose a family that day. I was liberated from one. And in its place, I found a real one. This whole experience has been a journey, and it makes me wonder about all of you watching. Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand with your own family? A moment where you had to choose your own well-being over their expectations? Let me know in the comments below. Share your story. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. Thank you for listening.